So what I'm planning on doing here, we have a photograph that was taken of Frank. I actually have a couple that we saw the other one up there before, and I'm not sure this thing is supposed to autofocus, but is it going to autofocus down there? Not very well. Oh well. If anybody really wants to, you can come up, and the camera's here, so people could stand around me on this side over here if you wanted to come up a little closer to see what's going on. So anyway, I have this photograph. I've done a drawing of it on my paper just to make sure that I can really do it in an hour. I did it before, so this is basically what we're heading toward. So I'm working from a black and white photograph. And then I always have this question, you know, where do I start on a painting and why do I start in a particular place? One thing to think about is where is your hand going to be working, and something like this where I'm going to be working fairly quick and the thing's going to stay pretty wet, I need to really think about where my hand's going to be. So what I discovered when I was doing this painting is that I need to start over on the left-hand side because I'm right-handed. So I can paint there and work my way this way. So let's start right on in there, and let me get my brushes out so I can get to them. Turn my paint thing around because I forgot to do it earlier.
How long have you been watercolor?
I started watercolor painting when I was probably 12 years old, but I didn't take classes until I was in my 30s. I had, you know, got watercolor books to look at and things like that, but I didn't actually take a class from anybody. So I studied for about 3 years with Karen Fry in Oakland.
I know where she used to go.
If I could have just a little bit more light where I am, I would be happier.
Maybe dim the back.
Yeah, maybe, can you dim part of the lights?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're doing it live.
And then I've taken a number of workshops with a number of people, but I must admit I've learned more since I started teaching than I knew before I started teaching, because I learned from my students. And you know, they're always asking questions, and we're going to try something. I got to learn how to do something to show it to them, and so I've learned a lot of things over the years. Okay, so we are going to start on this side where this is the view out of the window, and part of what I'm going to want to achieve on this is the feeling of sunlight coming in on Frank. Hopefully I get his face looking somewhat like him, but at least he'll look like a human, not a giraffe, I hope. So we'll find out. All right. And let's see, I have a little bit of Dirty Pan Blue in here that was a phthalo blue. It's probably a little too phthalo-ish for me, so I'm going to add some cobalt blue to it, which is in this part of my pan. And I need to make a big enough puddle that I can use that same color throughout here without losing it. So I'm making a little bit more of a puddle here. Thing with watercolor is that you're spreading everything with water. It's not like oil paints where you put it down and it stays there. With watercolor, it moves around. And so you have to know that that's going to happen as you're working. So we're going to go ahead and start working up in here. I'm going to just sort of quickly bring in my color and stop at places that I don't want it. And keeping in my thing of always on the left and then working my way across. I'm going to paint down through here. I'll come back and put in that building. And I see, yeah, I'm not going to worry about the fact that I've gotten a little bit up onto this bar here because that is going to go dark. A little bit more color in here. So I'm just trying to get a little bit of color put in place. Now, as I get down to this next building, it has a white roof on it. So rather than painting all the way through that space, I'm going to stop at that little building. And bring that down. This is dark. That can go right over that. And I'm going to have green, brown, other colors in there, all of which have blue in them, so I can come through and paint into these other spaces with this blue. And yeah, we'll just do it right through there. I'm gonna come back and do more layers on this. Gentleman in the front row was asking if I do several layers. Yes, I'm a painter who likes to do layers. Some watercolor artists will come in and do everything right up to finish to start with. I'm not that person. So we use the white of the paper as the whites in our painting, so I have to leave white behind while I'm painting. So we'll come back and we'll do work in that area more later. Now I'm gonna look at this area behind Frank, because I want to sort of define what the side of his face and his body looks like before I work on him. So I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna do just a little bit of color and work on him. And I have some black mixed up here. I'm gonna put it in there to gray that down. And I'm not gonna make it as dark as what I did on the finish here, because I wanna come in and do a couple layers on this. So once again.
You always work on the background first, or?
No, not always. Because I'm working right to left here, I'm feeling like I need to do this background so that I'm not gonna come in with my hand on it later. And so that's one reason why I'm doing the background. The other thing is that, you know, this is a dark background. I have a choice when I have a dark background. Do I do it first or do I do it last? And because I wanna sort of see what the edge of him is going to look like, and he's very light, I decided to paint this background first so that I can come in here and find the edge of him right away. Otherwise, I would paint him and then come in and do this background and correct anything that maybe I screwed up with. Because with the dark background, I can hide a certain amount of stuff. Not everything, but I can hide quite a bit. And I want to keep working with this, moving this down where it's wet, so that I'm not getting a lot of marks in it. So I'm trying to keep a little sort of damp bead on the bottom of what I'm working on. I'm already getting a little bit of a mark there, but I'm going to go darker layers, so I'm not going to worry about it. Margaret, you can go back in. I'm just looking at these little holes in between that tree. Now, one of the interesting things about this sculpture that's in the window, this is one of Frank's pieces, and I understand it was one of the ones that he really liked, but he kept it in the window of his building for years. And so it's the only thing that I remember about Frank. I never actually got to meet him, but walking past his building, I would see this little sculpture. It looks sort of like a tree or maybe a head of coral. It's made out of plaster. It actually has a light bulb in the middle of it, so you can turn a light on in it. But it's a very tree-like sculpture.
Is that sculpture still in the building?
Yes, it is. It's hidden in one of the closets.
Oh,
Roz was just talking about the fact that she was moving it and she didn't want to break it. But yes, we still have it.
What year did he die?
He died in June of 1999, and he was 98 years old. And my understanding is that he was still writing and painting up until close to his death. And in the last few years of his life, those creative friends of his encouraged him to self-publish about 4 books. And so some of them are poetry. One of them has mostly pictures of his work with a little bit of poetry interspersed. Another one has drawings that he did about Alameda in it. So we've got copies of all of those, but because we don't have a lot of them, we don't have them for sale, except for I think one of them, we have about 50 copies. And so we do have that one down in the gallery for sale. Also, if you've ever been to the center, on our staircase, there is what I would probably call murals. Mural artists painted them, but they're little paintings having to do with Frank's life. And so they either have some of his poetry, they have a little bit of information about, you know, him being in the service, and then some of his paintings are replicated on those stairs. So it's really a fun thing to see. Okay, so do I start on Frank or no, I don't want to put my hand into this, so let's work on Frank and then we'll do the rest of that background. So Frank, I know I tell everybody, my students in particular, use the biggest brush you're willing to. I think I need to go smaller for his face. How much smaller do I need to go? That's the other question. I brought about
6.
an 8. The smallest one that I brought is a 3. And I got a 6 here. I have a 8. So let's see. So we've been working on faces a little bit in my classes this week, and so I'm going to start this the same way I've been doing those portraits, and that is to come up with a skin tone base. I'm going to put a little bit more blue in. This is burnt sienna. And, let's get a little bit bigger brush here because I can't mix that up fast enough. So I'm starting with burnt sienna. And then I'm going to add just a touch of quinacridone rose to it. Nice rosy red. And do I like that color? I think it maybe is a little too red. So let's add a little bit of cobalt blue to it. And is that too gray? No, that might be about right. I might have been a little bit gray on his skin tone when I did it before. I never met the man, so I don't know for sure what the color of his skin was like. All I can know is that we have a self-portrait of him that he did, and the skin tone on that, you know, looks like he'd been out in the sun quite a bit and had a little bit of a tan. Okay, so I'm going to start with the shaded part of his face. And if I need to, I'll drop down into this smaller brush that I've got in my other hand. So now this, I'm thinking about hard edges and soft edges here. His glasses are dark. Just a little dampness on the edge of my finger. The side of his glasses here is dark, so I can paint right over that. And this is all the dark part of his face coming down here. And now before this starts drying, I need to come right in immediately, rinse my brush, dry it out halfway, pick up the edge of this, and soften this down into here. Bring it down into his glasses. Yeah, I'll pick up even more of it, get a little bit more paint back in there. Introduce maybe a little too much water there. Yeah. And then this side of his nose is darker. That side of his nose is darker. A little shadow runs down his mouth. It's a little bit dark underneath here. There's a little bit of a shadow coming through here, and I better soften one more space here. Can you guys actually see what's going on up there? Okay, good. And so, you know, a lot of face, parts of a face are soft. So we're rounded, we're not square. And because something is rounded, we need to have a soft change from one space to another. Soften that, take that down like that, okay. And then this dark goes underneath his chin the whole way. And then there's a little bit of darkness here and a little bit inside his glasses. This eye is in shadow. And that should be a little more shadow there. This eye is actually in shadow just a little bit too. So now we're starting to see those glasses of his. His mouth comes across through here, a little bit more there, and let's go into a smaller brush. Oops. I didn't do what I tell everybody else to do. My rag is my friend. Before diving in, especially on something that when I've got just a little small bit, I need to take and touch it to my rag to make sure I don't have too much on my brush. Pull that up there, make that a little bit darker. I'm going to come back in and do a little bit more detail work around this later. I need to let this part of it dry before I can do that, but his ear can have a little thing, and that's gonna stay very light there, so we're gonna leave the rest of that alone. So for right now, other than doing his neck, which I should do as well, because it looks like he has a disembodied head. Bring that down. And some of this I've got a little bit dark, so I'm gonna do a lift on it. Take this brush, dry it out halfway, and pick up a little bit of this wet paint. You guys are being quiet.
What's,
Do you
one
need
of
more
your,
questions?
Yeah.
what's one of your favorite watercolor artists?
My favorite watercolor artist. Ooh. You know, that's a good question that I'm not sure whether I have the brain power at the moment to answer. I follow a lot of watercolor artists, and one of the ones that I'm getting very excited about is going to be teaching at the Frank Betts Center this summer, and that's Jeffrey Allen. He's been putting a lot of stuff up on Facebook. Another one of our plein air artists that I really love her work is Margaret Tapp.
Here.
Yeah, but you know, Turner the one I'm thinking of? The one who had the show over in San Francisco, did work in Spain. I really loved what he was doing with his
Sargent?
watercolor. What's that?
Sergeant?
Sargent. Sargent's the one I'm thinking of, yeah. Very good. Okay, so now underneath of his cap here, this is in some, let's just get a little bit of this gray in there as well. You know, I'm a little bit of a sucker for fairly realistic work, and so that's the ones that I tend to lean toward. But watercolor is so versatile. I mean, you can do so many different things with it. You can be quite abstract with it. You can be super loose with it. You can be very tight with it, and all of it works pretty well. Okay, so that gets his face pretty decent. So now let's start working on his body. So I'm making up colors for this. I'm sort of going, you know, he's a guy. He's probably going to have sort of not very bright colors. And so I decided that, you know, he probably has sort of a greenish type apron rather than a bright pink one. You never know. You know, maybe he liked red ones. I'm not really sure. I've never seen one of his aprons, but I do know that he always wore plaid shirts. Mm-hmm. And the few clothes of his that we still being sort of kept with are shirts that are like blue and green plaids. So that's why I decided to sort of pick these kind of colors.
When that woman mentioned his apron and his pants, she had a specific name for them, which I've never.
Carhartt.
It's a brand.
Oh, it's a brand. Okay.
I guess because I'm not married, I don't know men's
Yeah.
clothing.
Men's clothing, yeah.
It's working man's apparel.
Oh, working man's apparel. Okay. Yeah, because that, you know, all the pictures I've ever seen of him, you know, he's either wearing a sweater like this with his plaid shirt, or he's wearing the plaid shirt. And then, you know, he was a working man. He was doing furniture refinishing. You don't want to wear fancy clothes for that. Plus, he was I wouldn't really say a miser, but he lived simply. His, you know, apartment that he lived in was definitely a studio apartment. Apparently, he had what's our closet now underneath of the stairs was where he had his kitchen and his water supply. So he had a toilet and the kitchen underneath of the stairs in that closet that we've got. The bathroom that we now have was not there, so he didn't have that. So he was living very simply. It was something very simple. Yeah. All the plumbing is there underneath of the in that closet. Wow. So I'm assuming, I don't know for sure. Apparently he just had like a little cot that he slept on, and then he had all his artwork. And so, you know, he had his paintings that he was working on. He did a lot of oil paintings, and So that whole room was his working studios, work studio. And then he had, people living upstairs.
Yeah, we met some of those people one time, they came by.
That's right. There were a couple of, a young man who came by.
Yeah.
What, his uncle lived upstairs or something, and he was there, he got to stay there for a while
Yeah,
visiting.
yeah.
So I'm getting a little bit of shadow in here. I was asked if I paint wet on wet. Well, this is wet on wet. So this is damp, and now I'm putting a little bit darker color in on that damp that I put in to make a shadow across there. And then he's also got some wrinkles that run through here that we can put in and let those be a little bit soft. There's also a shadow from the sculpture that's going to come onto his body here that I can add in now and let that just be with that wet on wet, so it's a little soft on there.
How do you decide what to leave out?
How do I decide what to leave out? If I don't like it, I leave it out. But also, if I feel that it doesn't add to the story, so if it's something that's not important to the story, I leave it out. If I feel that it's going to be confusing, I'll leave it out.
Or distracting.
Or distracting, yes.
Do you like
Confusing.
accidents?
Huh?
Accidents,
Accidents.
yeah. to the
Happy
word.
accidents, yes. Just watch me while I'm stopping to talk.
Never use colored pencils or something.
I don't a lot, but I definitely encourage my students to play with them. I do some, but not a lot. But colored pencils can add another textural element to it. Another thing that I do sometimes, and that is the initial drawing. I'll do that with colored pencil, because you can, the watercolor pencils, so they'll be water soluble, and so that will sort of disappear or become an element in the final piece. Now, I probably made a mistake here in that okay, we're gonna just solve this way. This side of his arm was going to be right where I was going to put my hand, right through his apron.
You started with dry paper, right?
Dry paper, yes. Yeah, something like this, I'm not going to start with wet paper because I want a little bit more control. And if I start with wet paper, I'm going to have to wait for it to dry or work with the fact that it's wet for a while. I know we had a very nice, speaking of another artist that I really love his work, Stephen Barry came and did a demo for us. He likes working, starting with very wet paper, and then he starts with these very loose parts of it, and then as it's drying, he treats it as drier and drier paper. So by the time he's finished, he's working on dry paper with the wet brush and heavier paint. So he's getting darker and thicker paint as he works.
So does he use a heater,
No.
air dryer?
Yes, actually he did occasionally, if he needed to hurry it up when he was doing a demo. He said he wouldn't normally at home when he's working, but doing a demo he needed to have it hurry up a little bit. So he was using a hairdryer to dry it so that he could get it to a dry enough level that he could treat it like dry paper. And you can, even if it's damp, you're still going to be able to hold edges as long as you don't come in with too wet of paint.
What color are his arms?
Your favorite color, brown. She hates brown. Burnt sienna with, I mixed a little bit of ultramarine blue into it to make sort of a gray brown. I'm sort of thinking, that brown natural wool brown color from a black sheep. That, he'd probably lean towards something like that. I'm going to just pick up a little bit more here. It's also going to make a little texturing here because the paper is going to show through there a little bit. This part of his sleeve maybe was a little bit dark. So I'm coming in with a damp brush on that damp area and just picking a little bit of that off of there. Now, whether I like what I did is something else, but let's just add back in Just maybe, no, that's gonna have to dry a little bit more. Okay, so let me do one little quickie thing, and that's to get that plaid shirt in. After all, Frank must have a plaid shirt. Maybe some of you guys have met Frank during the 4th of July parade. We bring him out once a year. You know, one of our artists, quite a few years ago, the story I've been told is that one day Deborah was sitting there and it was sort of boring, and one of the artists drove up with his pickup truck, and he came in and he says, "Deborah, I've got something for you. Frank's here." And she went, "Frank's here? What do you mean?" She went out to the pickup truck, and he'd made a life-size paper mache model of Frank and found his clothes. So there was the blue jeans and the plaid shirt and the little hat that he always wore, a pair of glasses on him, and he looked just like Frank. So every so often we bring him out and put him somewhere in the gallery and scare people with a person sitting there. But we also bring him out over 4th of July, and he rides in the car with us so that he can say hello to all of his fans. But we make jokes about him being just a little bit stiff, you know.
Or maybe he's really inside.
He is. I know he is. I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is.
That would be creepy.
Yeah, that would be creepy, wouldn't it? But yeah, he got a little bit beat up, and we had to actually put a bamboo pole up his spine to get him up.
Oh, boy.
Poor guy.
Rolling over now.
Let's see, and those should be green. So we're getting a little bit of plaid going there for his shirt, and then let me get some blue in that plaid so that it has the Frank Bet plaid. All right. So now, let's see, that's dried enough now? Yeah, let's go ahead and get that building put in. Doing okay, it's only been half an hour.
If you can go over too. We
Oh.
got the room for the evening.
Yeah, we've got an hour and a half, right, to do this. We've got until 7.
Do you have any other collaborations with the library?
You know, I did do another thing with the Friends of the Library a number of years ago. At this point, we decided to have a paint and sip party, and the library paid for it. It was free for anybody to come to. We did it at the Alameda Brewery, and so it was acrylic painting rather than watercolor, and everybody got to do a painting. And I brought all the supplies, and we had about, I don't know, 12, 15 people there. That was sort of fun.
I didn't realize that was with the library.
Yeah, that was with the library.
We just started a Pathways to Learning kit,
Yeah.
Yes.
which is way cool. I was looking to see if there was watercolor here. There's not.
Yeah.
That is something I'm working on, is, we have a survey going out, to do a library of things.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna look at which pathway learning kids are doing well, and things that people would like to see, but we did a survey for different types of kids, and arts and crafting.
Yeah.
Tool lending was one of them, so
Yeah, right now it's only garden.
it's not that many items, that's right. But
Yeah.
we have this, new year of strategic planning coming, and so we'll be asking for a lot more of your, oh no, we lost our camera.
Uh-oh.
It went to
Did
sleep.
I just touch something?
No, the computer went to sleep.
Oh, shame on it.
I know.
Did he get bored with my
There we go.
painting? I didn't think I was
There
that
we go.
boring.
I think he got intimidated by the library.
Maybe that's what it was.
You were here before me.
So as you can see, I'm starting to put these little buildings in that are in the distance here. And, you know, don't have to do a whole lot to make it look like a building. A lot of it's, you know, human things tend to have square corners rather than round. And then let's go maybe a little bit darker and a dark blue for the top of that roof.
Isn't that side now dry?
It's dry enough to work on, yeah. It's not dry, but I can touch it without it lifting in my hand. So we're just gonna let some of that color run down in there. It's sort of fun.
Give him a Corvette.
What's that?
You could give them a Corvette instead of whatever's outside.
Oh, that car is not, there's one of those decisions. I don't wanna paint that car, it's not gonna be there. Now, a Corvette would be fun, you know? How about a Ferrari? You could have a Ferrari sitting out there.
Volkswagen Bug.
Yeah, a Volkswagen Bug would be about right for that time period. I remember my sister, she and her husband, got a Volkswagen Bug back in the sixties. Pretty proud of that. Pretty proud of that little car.
I had a number of them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I had one, it took a case of oil a week.
A case of oil a week, oh no.
Well, mostly would go to
Tell
about
you my age, but I remember I was able to fill it up for $2.50.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, remember when it was 25 cents a gallon or 50
Yeah.
cents a gallon?
Five when it was high, yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, everything's 10 times higher. You know, when I
Oh,
first
yeah.
moved to Alameda, you could buy a house for 30,000.
Shit.
And we thought that was expensive because it had been 25,000 a few years before that.
Well, you could have, but it would be a very, very, very small monopoly.
Just getting a little bit more of this grass put in back there to sort of hide that in the background. And then let's put a little bit of shading on that tree. No, maybe I better do these first before I work down there. So once again, I don't know what color Frank had the inside of his building painted. We've gone through various changes of color in there. I mean, right now we have this beautiful blue-gray, so that's what's going into the back of that. But these windows, I think we have them painted white, but I'm gonna make them brown. It's just a little easier. So we get this, and
Show up better.
yeah, it's gonna show up better, exactly. So when I see something else that I'm gonna need to do here too, because we can't see this one roof unless I either paint the sky darker behind it or lift it a little bit. Let's just, so once your watercolor dries, it always stays soluble. So you can come in and lift off. There, now that.
Yeah, I heard of people actually erasing their whole painting by putting it under the shower.
Yes, I've told people about that. I like to tell the story about one of my paintings that I was just really disgusted with. It just was not coming together. I took it in the shower, washed it all off, let it dry, painted again, and sold it.
All right.
So it was like, yeah. Otherwise, it was going to become junk. So yeah, your watercolor, the paint itself stays soluble forever. Some colors will stain the paper, and so it's harder to get it out.
China white, is that a watercolor?
Yeah, China white is an opaque watercolor, but yes, that's watercolor. And gouache is watercolor too, but it's just opaque.
Somebody asked what kind of paper you're using.
What kind of paper?
Mm-hmm.
It's 140-pound, 100% cotton paper, and this happens to be Blick brand. I usually use Arches, but I have a block of Blick that I thought I would play with, and it's working pretty nice. I'm pretty happy with it. Let's see, that comes here. Gonna be a few little changes that I ended up doing when I started working on this. This is going to go a little more blue in there, and that tabletop is going to get blue. But now let's get some gray on the sculpture. So the light's coming in from this side, and I've kept that nice shiny bit on him, and it's on the windows. And now as I do the shadowing on this piece of sculpture, I need to think about where those shadows are, so that we don't end up looking like the light's coming from 2 or 3 different directions. Fortunately, I have my photograph here to look at. And then let's shadow down into there, and let's pull some shadow here, shadow there. and I'm sure I didn't get all of the pieces of this drawn in. Once again, you know, what do you leave out? Sometimes if something looks too complicated and I'm feeling like it's not gonna add to it, I might simplify something that I see out there or in my photograph. I like to tell my students that you don't have to be a slave to your photograph. If there's something in your photograph that isn't working or, you know, isn't adding to the picture, feel free to either remove it or move it. This guy's looking pretty good, but I need put something right back there and make that stand out a little bit more. And then the bottom of this, and then we have a shadow coming off of this across the table, shadow coming off of that across the table as well, and a shadow coming off of this across the table and down that edge. Okay.
So Margaret,
Yes.
do you usually paint from photographs or do you paint from your imagination at times?
I rarely paint from my imagination. All my paintings that I've done from my imagination went in the fireplace.
Not even made it to the shower.
Didn't even make it to the shower, except for when I'm doing these big, loose, wet and wet things, and sometimes I get something that's really fun. But no, being a little bit of a realist, I tend to, I work from photographs when I'm working in the studio. I also paint outdoors. Not a lot, not as often, although what I do, I always have a sketchbook in my purse with a pen, and so I do pen and ink sketches whenever I have any free time, when I'm sitting waiting for something, sitting having a cup of coffee at the cafe, or, you know, waiting at the doctor's office, those sorts of things. But no, I'm not a big imagination type person, although I've done some illustration stuff which is sort of that way. So it's a whole different little game. I really enjoy, there's a Dinotopia, I think it is, an artist that does these, he does dinosaurs in modern settings. And a bunch of fun stuff with that. And so, you know, if I were going to be doing imagination stuff, that would be the direction I'd be going with it. Okay, so where are we on this? Now, this is going to go, I need to go a little darker on the side of this table, and let's get a little bit of what I call dry brush work here. Just to dull down that table a little bit, because I don't want it standing out. One of the things that happens is that where you have an intersection of dark and light, it's going to be where your eye's going to want to go. I've got a big one here, but I think because we're trying to see the shadow coming through here, that'll be okay. So before I even do this, I think we better work on Frank again. See if we can get his face working just a little bit better. Okay, so he has, I don't know what color his eyes were. I think they might have been blue, but it's so dark in here, I think it's okay that he ends up with sort of brownish black eyes here. His eyes are up close to that.
He's German, so he probably did have
Blue
blue
eyes.
eyes.
Might have, yeah. Once again, you know, most of the photographs,
Dark eyes.
yeah, most of the photographs we have of them are either black and white or they're such poor quality they can't really see in his
Yeah.
face very well. He's got eyebrows. Let's let those eyebrows come through. And then this side of the face is going to go quite a bit darker.
The window pane, you made it more perspective looking to me.
Once I did that,
Yeah.
then you get some depth to it. Yeah. Yeah, I realized when I finally came in and did that when I was doing the original, you know, my preliminary to try to make sure things were going to work, that that really did give a whole lot of sort of sense of depth.
Then the shadow on his torso.
This here, yeah. And we're going to do a little bit more shadowing over this side as well. And then, let's see, we have a little bit more around his nose. You know, noses are important. It's easy to overdo them, but if you don't do them, then what did we decide in class? You have Voldemort. You know, in the Harry Potter movies, they had him without a nose, and so then you get this evil person.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna bring a little bit through here, and then I want to get a little bit of pink on his lips. Oop, that's a bit too much. Okay, we can always take a little bit off. And when in doubt, remove it. And also, this eyebrow is too dark. That's much better, much better. But I still need to go a little bit darker in this part of his eye socket. And it's a matter of put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off. And that's one there. A little bit of dark around the edge of that those glasses. And a little bit of dark around the edge of those glasses. A little bit of darker right there. And across that. Face looks halfway decent. Halfway decent. But you get a little bit more chin action here by darkening that up. And a little more underneath here.
Oh, you're
Dying off again on
I
me.
know.
Okay,
Boy, you are bored, obviously. That computer is
sorry,
bored.
we gotta leave, so,
Okay.
thank you very much.
You're welcome. See it up front there?
Okay.
I had a long.
I know how those days go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Very good.
All right. So we're getting down on this. I actually don't have a huge amount more to do, but a bit more. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start getting it around the back of him, and then we'll do the shading on the arm at the very end. So I'm wanting to make this into more of a navy blue, so I'm adding some of my mixed black here into it. This black mixture is a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue.
You don't wanna do across, the shadow across his.
Yeah, we'll add that in too in a bit, but thank you for reminding me, I forgot about that. I don't think I mixed up enough of this. And do I want to do that with my blue or red?
that.
Exactly.
Oh,
Oh my gosh, guys, I'm so sorry.
Do you need to use my plug-in for that?
It should be.
Oh my gosh.
Just stay back
All right, so now we can pull this down this other side. And because this is in shadow over here, I can bring this blue right onto my brown to darken that up in the shadow areas. It's gonna come down into that. And then I'll come back and put some more brown on top of that. I also have another table in the back here, but I think what we're gonna do is come back and darken this side in a minute. And I won't worry about that yet. So I'm doing this pretty wet so that I can get that, sort of flow of color there. In some ways, I could, when you're wanting to do a really dark passage, sometimes it's better to come in with a lighter color like this and then feed the dark in on top of it so that it'll go in there really even. So let's try that. So I know one of my students was asking me about whether I paint wet and wet all the time. And, you know, my answer was no. I sort of judiciously decide when I'm going to wet an area and then add more color to it. This is one of those times that if I want to get that really pretty dark and fairly smooth, then pre-wetting it with my color is a way to do it. And now his sweater is almost the same shade as that back, but it's a different color. So I'm going to mix up and just put this on right away. And if these two blend together just a little bit, I don't care, because this area, you know, he's sort of hiding into that back area there. So get this sweater nice and dark there. And it's a little bit dark around his apron. And then I want to soften this edge of it right here. And maybe his sweater isn't that light, so let's just soften and lighten there. And slightly lighter there. Okay, that looks pretty good. And his shirt at this point feels like it needs to go a bit darker, so let's darken it down a little bit. And this was a little bit of a harder edge here, this shadow that came across through there. And then, as Marie said, we need the shadow that runs across his belly and over into there, and it is brown here. Let's see if it wraps across him. Okay, that helps. And then let's get a little bit more darkness around his sleeve. And there's a shadow that runs this way too. Across his clothes, over to here. And a dark place there. Okay, what else should I do to it? Space, it still doesn't feel happy to me, but I'm not sure I want to deal with it. There's a pocket here. I think his mouth.
Shadow under his cap.
Yeah, it's more shadowy underneath the here, isn't it? That looks better. And then his face actually could be, you know, wait, I thought I had got plenty of shadow in there, but I think this whole part of his face needs to go a little bit darker. Down across that. It's a little darker. Maybe a little lighter right at the end of it. And is that cap dark enough now? That needs to be a little darker right there.
Maybe the back of his cap, towards the back of his head.
Back in here?
Shadow,
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really feel like it's in shadow, you know, and when I put it in, it seemed darkish, but once I got that darker background behind it, it really And then I don't need, this should not be white right there. It should not be white there. This became a wet blob, but, shall I just not worry about it? Speaking of happy accidents. Oh, and then, maybe his shirt here. On that part of the shirt just a little bit. And right along this edge of the shirt just a little bit. And this is bothering me. It needed to go dark, but it felt like it was a little too dark and strong. And then, there's a little piece of his mouth over there. Okay.